My name is Victoria, and I'm about to turn off the tap on my children's inheritance. That probably sounds cruel, doesn't it? A mother intentionally pulling the plug on her own son and daughter. But before you judge me, I want you to understand something about water. Out here, where the sun beats down on the clay soil and the wind carries the scent of dust and distant rain, water isn't just a utility, it's life, it's memory, it's the promise my husband Robert made to this land, and the promise I made to him. And my children, in their infinite modern wisdom, forgot that promises, like roots, run deeper than the deeds they file at the courthouse. They have the land. But I have the water, and their multi-million-dollar dream is about to turn to dust. It all started, as these things so often do, with a fall, not a dramatic, life-altering tumble down a flight of stairs, but a simple, clumsy slip on a patch of wet grass behind the smokehouse. I landed hard on my hip, and the pain was a brilliant, sharp thing that stole my breath. Carter, my son, was there in an hour, his car kicking up a plume of gravel on the lane. He's a man who moves with a sense of manufactured urgency, as if he's always on the verge of closing a deal. His face, which used to hold such boyish charm, has tightened over the years into a mask of perpetual low-grade annoyance. He helped me into the house, his touch surprisingly gentle, which was the first manipulation. Brooke, my daughter, arrived a day later from the city, smelling of expensive perfume and impatience. She surveyed the farmhouse, the home she grew up in, with the critical eye of a health inspector. Her gaze lingered on a bit of peeling paint on the windowsill, the worn spot on the armchair where Robert used to sit. She didn't see history, she saw depreciation. They fussed over me for a week. They brought groceries I didn't ask for, tidied rooms that were already clean, and spoke in low, serious tones just outside my bedroom door. They used words like manageable and liability and long-term solution. I was recovering. The doctor said it was just a bad bruise, but in their eyes I had suddenly become ancient, a relic as worn and unreliable as the old tractor in the barn. The day they brought the papers was a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, feeling more myself, watching a bluebird peck at the feeder outside. Brooke placed a stack of documents in front of me, thick and imposing. Carter stood behind her, his arms crossed, projecting an aura of reluctant authority. "It's just a power of attorney, Mom," Brooke said, her voice smooth as cream. "It's so we can help you with the bills, manage the farm accounts, just until you're back on your feet." "You know how complicated things are," Carter chimed in. "We're worried about you, Mom. All alone out here. What if you'd fallen and couldn't reach the phone? This just lets us step in. Take some of the burden off your shoulders. It's for your own good. For your own good." How many times had I heard that phrase? It was the anesthetic they applied before performing surgery on my life. I looked at their faces, my children, the two souls I had nurtured from helpless infants into these confident, calculating adults. I saw the flicker of greed in Carter's eyes, the brittle ambition in Brooke's smile. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about their inheritance. They saw the farm not as a legacy, but as a portfolio asset, underperforming and ripe for liquidation. But a part of me, the part that had been a mother for 35 years, wanted to believe them. It's a powerful, destructive instinct that need to trust your own flesh and blood. And I was tired. The fall had shaken me more than I let on, a stark reminder of my own mortality. Robert was gone. The daily grind of the farm, once a shared joy, was becoming a heavy chore, so I signed. I didn't read the fine print. My hand, guided by a cocktail of pain medication and a lifetime of maternal habit, scrawled my name, Victoria Ann Miller, on the dotted line. It felt less like a signature and more like a surrender. They folded the papers, gave me dutiful kisses on the cheek, and left. The silence that fell in their wake was heavier than before. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. The moving van arrived 2 weeks later. It was a shock. They had found me a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community an hour away. It was clean, beige, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. My protests were met with patient, pitying smiles. "Mom, we talked about this," Brooke said, "though we hadn't. It's not safe for you at the farm anymore. Think of it as a vacation." They packed for me. They chose the small, practical things, the things that would fit into a sterile box of a room. A few photo albums, my favorite reading lamp, a box of kitchen essentials, the rest, the sprawling, beautiful, memory-soaked contents of my life, were deemed clutter. The roll-top desk Robert built with his own hands, my grandmother's quilt, the collection of river stones we'd gathered from the creek bed over 40 years. They were to be put in storage. They said, a euphemism, I now know, for the auction house. As they guided me to Carter's car, my last look at the farmhouse was like a knife in my heart. It stood there, proud and quiet under the vast sky, the porch swing stirring in the breeze. It looked like it was waiting for me to come back. And as we drove away, I saw it a small, discreet sign, hammered into the fence post at the end of the lane. Viridian Estates, luxury living, coming soon. My vacation was permanent. My home had been sold from under me before I'd even left the driveway. The betrayal was so absolute, so breathtakingly cold. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis. And in the back of Carter's pristine luxury sedan, a tiny cold seed of an idea began to germinate in the barren soil of my grief. They thought they had taken everything. They were wrong. The first few weeks in that apartment were a blur of beige walls and suffocating silence. It was the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears, a hollow sound where the familiar symphony of the farm should have been. I missed the lowing of the cattle in the morning, the crow of the rooster that had been stubbornly defying the sun by a full hour for the last 5 years. I missed the creak of the floorboards in the hall, the sigh of the wind through the ancient oak tree outside my bedroom window. Here, the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tinny laugh track from a neighbor's television, and the frantic, useless beating of my own heart. I'd wake up in the dark, my hand reaching for Robert's side of the bed, only to find the cold, unfamiliar sheets of a twin mattress. The grief, which had softened into a dull ache in the years since his passing, returned with the sharp, jagged edges of a fresh wound. He would have never let this happen. Robert understood the soul of that land. He was born in the same room where I had given birth to Carter. His father and his grandfather before him had worked that same soil, their sweat and hope seeping into the earth, becoming part of its very fabric. He used to tell me, "Vicky, this farm isn't ours to own. We're just its caretakers. We keep it safe for the ones who come after." He meant for our family, for Carter and Brooke, and for their children. He never imagined that the threat to the farm wouldn't come from drought or bankers, but from the very bloodline he was trying to protect. I would sit for hours in the sterile armchair, a photo album open on my lap, but my eyes wouldn't see the pictures. I'd see ghosts. I saw a young Carter, his face smeared with mud and sunshine, holding up a wriggling earthworm with triumphant pride. I saw a tiny Brooke, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she chased butterflies in the wildflower meadow, her laughter like wind chimes. Where did those children go? When did their open, happy faces curdle into the tight, avaricious masks of strangers? The change had been gradual, I suppose, a slow erosion of values I had mistaken for the normal course of growing up. Carter went to business school and came back speaking a different language, one filled with terms like leveraging assets and maximizing returns. He looked at our fields of alfalfa not as a living part of an ecosystem, but as underutilized real estate. Brooke moved to the city and fell in with a crowd that valued brand names over character. She would visit for holidays, her compliments about my cooking sounding practiced and thin, her eyes constantly scanning her phone, her mind already back on some rooftop bar or gallery opening. They started talking about the farm's potentials years ago, even when Robert was still alive, though they were more subtle then. They'd make casual remarks about the property taxes, the cost of equipment repairs, the physical toll it was taking on us. You know that new development over on Highway 12, sold for a fortune, Carter would mention over dinner, pretending it was just an idle observation. Imagine what this land, with the creek frontage, would be worth. Robert would just shake his head, a sad, knowing look in his eyes. Some things are worth more than money, son, he'd say, and the conversation would die, only to be resurrected a few months later. They treated me like a child, but it was their own immaturity that was so galling. They were like petulant teenagers who wanted the keys to the car but had no respect for the engine. They wanted the value of the farm without understanding its worth. They saw it as a windfall, a lottery ticket they were entitled to cash in. My life, my memories, my home, they were just inconvenient details, minor impediments to their financial gratification. My breakdown came on a Thursday. Brooke had called, her voice bright and condescendingly cheerful. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Are you settling in okay? Did you join the book club yet? They have water aerobics on Fridays. You'd love it." I couldn't speak. A knot of pure hot rage was lodged in my throat. Water aerobics. She had stolen my legacy, my husband's dying wish, and was offering me water aerobics as a consolation prize. "Are you there?" I finally found my voice, but it was a stranger's, low and trembling. "You sold my home, Brooke." There was a pause, a carefully calibrated sigh. "We didn't sell it, Mom. We're managing it. The developer is just leasing the land for now, with an option to buy. It's a very complex arrangement. You wouldn't understand. You put a sign on my fence. That was just procedural, for zoning. Mom, you're getting yourself worked up over nothing. We're taking care of everything. This is what's best for the whole family." I hung up. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the cheap carpet rough against my cheek, and I wept. I wept for Robert, for the children I had lost, for the house that was no longer mine. I wept with a force that seemed to come from the very center of the earth, a wrenching, gutting sorrow that left me empty and breathless. I stayed there for a long time, until the sun went down and the room was filled with shadows, and in that darkness, a different feeling began to take root. The sorrow was still there, but it was joined by something else, something hard and cold and clear. Resolve. The tears had washed away the fog of grief and helplessness. My children thought I was a frail old woman, a relic to be managed and put out to pasture. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my quiet nature for senility. They had made a profound, and as it would turn out, very expensive miscalculation. That's when Arthur came to mind. Arthur Hemlock, our neighbor to the west. His family had farmed the adjacent plot for as long as Robert's had. He and Robert had grown up together, more like brothers than friends. Arthur was a quiet man, a widower himself, with hands like gnarled oak and eyes that saw everything. He'd kept a respectful distance since Robert's death, just a wave from his pickup truck or a shared nod over the fence line, but I knew he was watching. He knew what was happening. He had to. Small towns have their own telegraph, a network of gossip and observation that travels faster than any fiber optic cable. Finding his number was easy. It had been written in Robert's elegant script on the first page of our old address book, one of the few things I'd insisted on bringing. I stared at the number for a full day before my fingers would work. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed. It felt like a betrayal of my own children, seeking help from an outsider. But then the thought came, sharp and clear. They were the outsiders now. They had exiled themselves from my world, from the world of honor and promises that Robert and I and Arthur had inhabited. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low rumble, like gravel turning in a stream bed. Hemlock. Arthur. It's Victoria. Victoria Miller. There was a pause, and I could hear the immediate shift in his tone, from brusque to concerned. Victoria. Good Lord. I was wondering when I might hear from you. Are you all right? I saw the van. I'm in a place, Arthur. They put me in a place. The words came out wobbly. Pathetic. I know, he said. And the simple affirmation was like a balm. I saw the sign they put up too. Viridian Estates. Sounds like a disease. A small watery laugh escaped me. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks. It feels like one. What did they do, Victoria? How did they manage it? I told him everything. The fall, the fussing, the papers, the shame burned in my cheeks as I admitted to signing the power of attorney without reading it. I expected judgment, a disappointed sigh. Instead, I heard him take a slow, deep breath. The oldest trick in the book, he said, his voice laced with a cold anger that was entirely on my behalf. They wait till you're down, pump you full of painkillers and platitudes, and slide the knife in when you're not looking. Robert always worried about Carter's ambition. The mention of my husband's name, spoken with such familiar understanding, cracked open something inside me. He did, I whispered. He said Carter had a hole in him that he tried to fill with money. Well, Arthur said, his voice hardening, maybe it's time we filled that hole with something else. Dirt, maybe. And that was the catalyst. It wasn't just my own anger anymore. It was Arthur's righteous indignation, a reflection of my own pain that validated it, gave it weight and substance. It wasn't just me against my children. It was us. It was the old guard, the keepers of the faith, against the new breed of locusts. Arthur, I said, my voice suddenly steady, the resolve I'd felt solidifying into something like steel. I think they missed something important. Robert was a very careful man. He was a farmer. He knew that you could own all the land in the world, but if you don't have water, you have nothing but a desert. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his wise old head, connecting dots I was only just beginning to see. When he spoke again, his voice was different. It held a note of something I hadn't heard in a long, long time. It was the sound of a good fight brewing. Victoria, he said slowly, a grin evident in his tone. What exactly did you have in mind? The plan didn't come to me in a flash of cinematic inspiration. It surfaced slowly, a memory dredged up from the deep well of my 40-year marriage. It was a conversation I'd had with Robert, maybe 15 years ago. We were sitting on the porch swing, watching a summer storm roll in over the hills. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. A developer, a different one back then, had been sniffing around the county, buying up old family farms and turning them into soulless tracts of McMansions. Robert was quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on the creek that wound its way through our property. You see that water, Vicky, he'd said, his voice low. That's the lifeblood. The land is the body, but the water is the blood. They can't live without each other. He then told me about something his grandfather had done. Back in the 30s, during the Dust Bowl, times were hard and people were desperate. A big company from out east had tried to buy up the water rights from all the local farms, creating a private reservoir to sell back to the very people they'd bought it from. His grandfather, a man as stubborn and immovable as the granite bedrock of our land, refused. He went to the county office, a dusty building even then, and he had the deed for the water rights filed separately from the deed for the land. It was a peculiar, archaic legal maneuver, but it was ironclad. The land and the water were legally two separate entities. It cost him a pretty penny in legal fees. Robert had chuckled, and his neighbors all thought he was crazy, but he always said, "A man who controls his own water can never be truly broken." A few years after that conversation, when Robert's own health began to fail, he'd taken a trip into town by himself. He came back late in the afternoon, looking tired but satisfied. He'd patted my hand and said, "I took a page out of Grandpa's book today, just some estate planning, tidying things up." He never elaborated, and I, foolishly, never asked. I was too busy trying to deny the reality of his decline, to pay attention to the details of his foresight. I just assumed he was getting the will in order, but he wasn't. He was setting a trap, a time-delayed, perfectly legal trap for a future he must have foreseen more clearly than I ever could. This memory, once hazy, now blazed in my mind with perfect clarity. This was the secret leverage. This was the weapon Robert had left me. "Arthur," I said into the phone, my voice thrumming with a nervous energy, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to do something for me. I can't exactly get around easily here, and I don't want my name on any visitor logs. I need you to go to the county records office." "And what am I looking for?" "You're looking for water, specifically the deed to the water rights for Stillwater Creek Farm. I have a feeling it's not attached to the main property deed. I have a feeling it's filed separately, and I have a feeling it's in one name and one name only. Victoria Ann Miller." Arthur didn't question me. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just said, "I'll go first thing in the morning." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the small apartment like a caged animal. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, expecting it to be one of the children with more false pleasantries. I let it go to voicemail. Their messages were starting to change in tone. The bright, patronizing cheerfulness was fraying at the edges. "Hey, Mom, it's Carter. Just calling again. The developer, Mr. Harrison from Viridian, mentioned he needs some preliminary survey work done involving the creek. He said something about water access. I told him it was all part of the property, but his people are being difficult. Call me back." Click. Another message, an hour later, this time from Brooke. "Mom, Carter said you haven't been answering. Is everything okay? Look, this developer is putting up a lot of money, and we can't have any snags. We need to present a united front. He's asking for geological reports, water tables, stuff we thought was settled. It's really stressing Carter out. Please just call one of us." They were getting nibbles. The hook was set, but they didn't know it yet. They just felt a slight, inexplicable tension on the line. Arthur called at noon the next day. I snatched the phone before the first ring finished. "Well?" I asked, my voice a breathless squeak. "Well, Victoria," he said, and I could hear the slow, triumphant smile in his voice. "Robert Miller was a genius. It's here, clear as day, a warranty deed for full, exclusive, and perpetual riparian rights to all surface and aquifer water sources originating on or flowing through the property, legally described as Stillwater Creek Farm, filed in 2008, transferred from the joint ownership of Robert and Victoria Miller to the sole ownership of Victoria Miller, surviving spouse. It's a separate document, filed under its own parcel number. As far as the county is concerned, Viridian Estates owns a beautiful 300-acre tract of semi-arid land. You, my dear, own the well." I sank into my chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. A wave of relief so profound, it felt like a physical blow washed over me. It was real, Robert's foresight. My secret, it was all real. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about justice. It was about honoring the legacy of a man who loved his family enough to protect them even from themselves. It wasn't about revenge until it was. That cold little seed of an idea began to sprout, and its leaves were sharp. Now came the planning. Arthur became my general, my man on the outside. He was my eyes and ears. He'd drive past the farm every day on his way into town and give me reports. "They've got bulldozers at the gate, Vicky," he'd say. "Big yellow ones. Just sitting there, idling. Looks like they're waiting for the go-ahead. Let them wait," I'd reply, a strange calm settling over me. I started to research. The senior community, for all its beige blandness, had a computer lab. I spent hours online, a gray-haired ghost tapping away in a room full of people playing solitaire. I learned everything I could about Viridian Estates. They were a luxury developer known for their aggressive tactics and their golf course communities. Their entire business model depended on lush, green landscapes, ornamental ponds, and sparkling swimming pools. Water was not just a component of their projects, it was the main selling point. I found articles about their CEO, a man named Marcus Harrison. He was ruthless, known for pushing projects through local councils with a mixture of charm and veiled threats. He was exactly the kind of man Carter would admire. I also found their investor reports. The Stillwater Creek Project, or the Meadows at Stillwaters, as they had pretentiously renamed it, was their flagship development for the next quarter. Millions in capital had already been invested based on the acquisition of the land. Their stock price was banking on its success. Then I moved on to the legalities. I used a prepaid burner phone I'd had Arthur buy for me to make a few calls. I found a young, hungry lawyer in a town 3 counties over. I didn't want anyone local who might know the family. I explained the situation hypothetically. At first, so I said, my voice disguised, a little shakier than my real one. Let's say a person owns the water rights to a piece of land, but not the land itself. And let's say a developer has purchased that land, assuming the water came with it. What happens when the developer starts to build? There was a pause, then a low whistle from the young lawyer. "Ma'am, what happens is that the developer has a multi-million-dollar paperweight. They can't sink a shovel, they can't pour a foundation, they can't lay a single pipe without a water access agreement from your hypothetical person. Without that, they can't get permits, they can't get insurance, they can't get anything. Your person doesn't just have leverage, they have a stranglehold. And what if," I continued, my heart beating a little faster, "my hypothetical person were to say, call the water board and instruct them to terminate all access from that parcel to the municipal system just to be sure? The water board would have to comply," he said, an audible grin in his voice now. "The name on the deed is the only one they listen to. Whoever this person is, they're holding a royal flush." That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. It was no longer just a vague notion of stopping them. It was a clear, step-by-step campaign. I wasn't just going to block them. I was going to let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff, let them get their feet wet in the river of money they thought was flowing their way, before I revealed that the river was, in fact, a mirage. Arthur was my co-conspirator. He helped me set up a new bank account at a small credit union in another town, using my burner phone number. I had him retrieve some of my personal documents from the storage units my children had so graciously provided. It turned out to be a shoddy, non-climate controlled locker on the edge of town. My grandmother's quilt was already showing signs of mildew. The rage that sparked in me was a clean, purifying flame. The final piece of the plan fell into place when Arthur brought me the local paper. There was a small article on page 3, Viridian Estates to break ground on meadows at Stillwater. It detailed the grand ceremony planned for the following week. The mayor would be there, investors would be flown in. Carter and Brooke were quoted, talking about honoring their family's legacy by ushering the land into a new era of prosperity. The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. The article listed the date. Next Monday. I circled the date on my calendar, not with a red pen, but with a black one. It wasn't a celebration, it was a deadline. I had 1 week to prepare. 1 week until the silent takeover began. I looked at the picture of my children in the paper, smiling their slick, smug smiles. They looked so proud, so confident in the world they had built on a foundation of lies. They had no idea that foundation was about to be washed away. The day before the groundbreaking ceremony, I made the call. It was a Sunday morning, and the beige apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick felt like a countdown. I had the number for the county water board on a slip of paper in my hand. My fingers were trembling slightly as I dialed, not from fear but from a strange, exhilarating sense of power. It had been so long since I had felt anything but helpless. A tired-sounding woman answered, "County Water and Power. This is Darlene." I took a deep breath. "Good morning, Darlene. My name is Victoria Miller. I'm calling about parcel number 4B77AWR. I read the number directly from the copy of the deed Arthur had made for me. The WR stood for water rights. It was my secret code. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of typing. "Okay, I have it here," Darlene said, her voice a little more alert. "Stillwater Creek Farm, riparian rights. The owner is listed as Victoria A. Miller. How can I help you, Mrs. Miller?" "Darlene," I said, my voice calm and steady, belying the storm in my chest. "Effective immediately, I am ordering a complete and total cessation of all water access and diversion from that parcel. I want the taps turned off. I want the connection to the municipal grid severed. I want a lock placed on the main valve at the road. No water is to be drawn from the creek, the well, or any aquifer source on that property by any party for any reason until further notice from me, and only me." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of a page turning, as if she were consulting a physical rulebook. "Ma'am, I see there's a new land deed on file for the associated property, under the name of a corporation, Viridian Estates." "That's correct," I said. "They own the dirt, I own the water, and I am turning it off." "Okay," she said, the single word imbued with the beautiful, unassailable authority of a bureaucrat following the letter of the law. "The name on the deed is the name on the deed. We can have a crew out there this afternoon. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Please send me a certified letter confirming that the order has been executed. Send it to this address." I gave her the address of a post office box Arthur had rented for me in the next town over. I didn't want anything coming to the senior community. I wanted to be a ghost. After I hung up the phone, I sat in complete silence. The deed was done. The first move in a war my children didn't even know they were fighting had been made. It was a silent, invisible strike, a change in the flow of power as unseen and fundamental as the water table itself. I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist. The next day, Monday, was the day of the groundbreaking. I imagined the scene, the catering tent, the shiny hard hats, the golden shovels. I pictured Carter, his suit no doubt perfectly tailored, shaking hands with the mayor. I saw Brooke, elegant and smiling, charming the investors with practiced ease. They would be standing on my land, on Robert's land, selling a future built on a lie. And all the while, deep in the ground beneath their feet, the pipes were running dry. The well was silent. The creek flowed on, but legally it was as inaccessible to them as if it were on the moon. My phone started ringing around 4 o'clock that afternoon. It was Carter. I let it go to voicemail. His message was clipped. Annoyed. Mom, call me. The surveyors are having some kind of issue. They're saying the water main is offline. It's holding everything up. The mayor is getting antsy. Call me. An hour later, another message. Mom, seriously, where are you? Harrison is furious. The foreman just came and told him the entire water supply to the property has been shut off at the county level. They're saying it's a legal order. This has to be some kind of bureaucratic screw-up. I need you to call the water department and clear this up. They won't talk to me. They say I'm not the owner of record. The confusion in his voice was delicious. The first cracks were appearing in his confident facade. Then came Brooke. Her voice was strained, the charm replaced by a sharp edge of panic. Mom, what is going on? Carter is freaking out. Marcus Harrison is threatening to sue us for misrepresentation, he said, and I quote, "You sold me a desert. You have to fix this. Whatever it is, you have to fix it now." I didn't answer. I sat in my armchair, sipping a cup of tea, and listened to their frantic messages pile up, one after another. Their panic was a symphony to me. Each new voicemail was a testament to their arrogance, a monument to their short-sightedness. They had been so eager to declare me incompetent, so quick to seize control. They had reviewed every line of the farm's financial statements, every tax record, every bill of sale for the livestock, but they had overlooked the one thing that mattered most. In their haste to profit from the farm, they had never once bothered to understand it. Arthur called that evening. His voice was brimming with suppressed laughter. "Vicky, you should have seen it. It was better than the county fair. They had the whole shebang set up. A big banner, little sandwiches, the works. Then around 3:30, a county truck pulls up. A fella gets out, walks over to the main valve by the road, puts a big padlock on it, and drives off without a word. You could have heard a pin drop. 10 minutes later, all these guys in suits are talking on their phones, looking like they just saw a ghost. Carter Miller looked like he was going to be sick right on the mayor's shoes. I smiled, a real genuine smile that reached my eyes, and the groundbreaking has been indefinitely postponed. Arthur chuckled. Harrison, the developer fella, stormed off so fast, his car kicked gravel all over a city councilman. It was a beautiful thing to behold. The days that followed were a masterclass in escalating panic. My voicemail box filled up with areas of rage, confusion, and eventually pleading. Mom, this isn't funny. This is our future. You're sabotaging us. Carter, I swear, if you don't call me back, I am coming to that home, and we will have this out. You are being childish and selfish. Brooke, Victoria, this is Carter again. Please, Harrison's lawyers have sent a letter. They're talking about breach of contract. This is millions of dollars. Millions. What do you want? Is it money? We can talk about this. Just pick up the phone. But I didn't. I maintained my silence. I let them stew in the mess they had created. Their power over me had always been rooted in my desire for their love and approval, my willingness to keep the peace. By removing myself from the equation, by refusing to engage, I had rendered their tactics useless. You can't manipulate someone who isn't listening. You can't guilt-trip a ghost. The true beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't doing anything aggressive. I wasn't suing them or fighting them. I was simply not cooperating. I was exercising my legal right to control my own property. The property in question just happened to be the single most critical element of their entire scheme. They had built their house of cards on my foundation, and I had just quietly, calmly removed it. Finally, after a week of my silence, they did what I knew they would. They came to me, my neighbor down the hall, a sweet woman named Carol, buzzed me on the intercom. "Victoria, dear, you have some visitors, a young man and a woman. They say they're your children." Her tone suggested she had her doubts. "Send them up, Carol," I said. "It's about time we had a talk." The silent takeover was over. The power shift was about to begin. The knock on my apartment door wasn't a polite tap. It was a series of hard, impatient raps that vibrated through the cheap wood. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and opened it. Carter and Brooke stood there, side by side, a united front of indignation. Carter's face was blotchy with anger, his tie slightly askew for the first time I could remember. Brooke's makeup was perfect, but her eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. They looked past me, into the small beige room, as if trying to find the source of my sudden, inexplicable rebellion. "Can we come in?" Carter said, his voice tight. It wasn't a question. They brushed past me without waiting for an answer. Brooke immediately began pacing the small living room, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the linoleum floor. Carter stood in the middle of the room, his hands on his hips, radiating fury. "Okay, Mom," he began, dispensing with any pretense of concern for my well-being. "The game is over. What did you do?" I closed the door softly and turned to face them. I felt remarkably calm. The fear and grief that had been my constant companions for weeks were gone, replaced by a cool, clear certainty. I was no longer the frail, confused woman they had hustled out of her own home. I was the owner of the well. "I don't know what you're talking about, Carter," I said, my voice even. "I haven't done anything. I've just been sitting here, in the lovely apartment you found for me. Don't play dumb." Brooke snapped, whirling to face me. "The water. You turned off the water. How could you? You've ruined everything." Ruined everything. I raised an eyebrow. The simple gesture seemed to throw them off balance. They were used to me absorbing their accusations, not questioning them. "I seem to recall you two telling me you would be managing the farm. Is this part of the management plan?" Selling it off to the first bidder, with a fat checkbook, was paving over your father's legacy. For a luxury housing development, part of honoring him. Carter's face darkened. "That is not your concern. We are handling the business side of things. The farm wasn't profitable. It was a drain. We made a strategic decision to maximize the value of the asset." "The asset," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You call your home an asset?" "It's a piece of property, Mom," he shot back, his voice rising. "It's dirt, and it was about to be very, very valuable dirt until you pulled this stunt." "That's the thing about dirt, Carter," I said, walking over to the window and looking out at the manicured lawn of the senior community. "It's not worth much when it's dry." That's when it seemed to finally dawn on them, the full scope of it. They hadn't come here expecting a fight. They had come here expecting to intimidate, to bully me into signing another paper or making a phone call to fix their problem. They saw me as an obstacle, not an opponent. "The water rights," Brooke said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Carter, her icy composure finally cracking. "The deed. Robert, that day he went to the county office. Your father was a wise man," I said, turning back to them. "He was a farmer. He knew the value of things you can't list on a balance sheet. He knew that family should be a fortress, not a corporation. And he apparently knew his own children better than I did." The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a moment, a flicker of something, shame maybe, crossed Carter's face. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual defensive anger. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. "This is blackmail. You're holding us hostage." "No," I corrected him gently. "You are the ones who took me hostage. You used my health as an excuse to seize my home and my life. You put me in this waiting room for the afterlife and planned to sell our history for a pile of cash. I'm not holding you hostage, Carter. I'm simply choosing not to finance my own destruction." A strange thing had started to happen back in my old community. News, as Arthur had noted, travels fast. The story of the aborted groundbreaking ceremony was the talk of the town, but people knew more. They knew I'd been moved out. They saw the auction notices for the farm equipment. They saw my children's names in the paper, crowing about their new venture, and they knew the Miller family. They knew Robert. They knew me. They knew we would never have willingly let the farm be turned into a golf course. Arthur told me that people had started to treat Carter and Brooke differently. The butcher at the market, who had known Carter since he was a boy, suddenly became very busy when he walked in. Old Mrs. Gable from the church guild, who had always doted on Brooke, gave her a look so cold it could have frozen fire. This wasn't a corporate boardroom where their actions were anonymous and consequence-free. This was home, and they had broken the unspoken rules. They had become outsiders, exiles in their own hometown. The community was turning its back on them, and this, I think, was a shock they were not prepared for. Their plan was to cash out and be celebrated as savvy business people, not shunned as greedy, disrespectful children. "What do you want?" Brooke asked, her voice now dangerously soft, pleading. "Is this about money? We can renegotiate the deal. We can cut you in for a bigger share." I almost laughed. It was the only language they knew. The only solution they could conceive of was a financial one. "Oh, Brooke," I said, shaking my head sadly. "This was never about money. Not for me. It was about respect. It was about promises. It was about home. You took all of those things from me. You can't buy them back." "So what then?" Carter demanded, his frustration boiling over. "You're just going to sit here and let a $30 million deal collapse out of spite?" "Spite is a powerful motivator when it's all you have left," I said. "But no, it's not just spite. It's a lesson you both should have learned a long time ago. Some roots go deeper than blood, and you don't get to tear them up without consequences." I walked to my small kitchen counter and picked up a folder. It was the one the young lawyer had helped me prepare. "The deal with Viridian Estates is dead. Their lawyers have probably already told you that your power of attorney is voidable, given the circumstances under which I signed it. They probably also told you that you misrepresented the asset you were selling. You're lucky if all they do is walk away. They could sue you for fraud." I opened the folder, and then there's the matter of the farm itself, the one you now manage. You've taken out a substantial bridge loan against the property to cover preliminary costs, haven't you? I saw the lien at the county office, a loan based on a valuation of $30 million. But the property isn't worth $30 million. Without water, it's not even worth $3. And that loan, I believe, is coming due. The color drained from their faces. They looked at each other, the unspoken panic passing between them. They were leveraged to the hilt, confident their payday was just around the corner. Now the corner was gone. "You have two options," I said, my voice as crisp and final as a winter morning. "Option 1, you do nothing. The loan defaults, the bank forecloses, they take the land, and you are left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a ruined reputation. Option 2, you sign the farm back over to me, not to a trust, not to a corporation, to me, the full unencumbered deed. In exchange, I will agree to release a small metered amount of water to the property, just enough to keep it from becoming a complete dust bowl and to satisfy the bank that it's not worthless. This will allow you to sell it, but not to a developer. You'll sell it to the county land trust, who Arthur has already spoken with. They're willing to pay a fair agricultural price for it to turn it into a protected nature preserve. It won't be millions. It will be just enough to clear your loan and maybe walk away with a few $1,000s for your trouble, enough to pay for your gas home. They stared at me, dumbfounded. This was a scenario they had never imagined. They had come for a surrender, and I had handed them a detailed, non-negotiable set of terms for their own defeat. That's not a choice, Carter stammered. It's the only choice I'm offering. I said, you have 24 hours to decide. The offer is on the table until noon tomorrow. After that, I let the bank do its work. Now, I believe you know the way out. I pointed to the door. For a long, silent moment, they just stood there, the architects of a ruined empire. Then, without another word, they turned and left, the angry clicking of Brooke's heels replaced by the slow, heavy tread of the defeated. The power shift was complete. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic showdown in a boardroom or a tearful, screaming match in my apartment. It was quiet, anticlimactic, and utterly devastating for them. We met, at my insistence, at a small, neutral law office in a neighboring town. The lawyer I had consulted, a sharp young woman named Miss Albright, sat at the head of the table. I sat to her right, and Arthur, my steadfast ally, sat to my left. Carter and Brooke sat opposite us, looking pale and exhausted. The bravado and anger they'd shown in my apartment had evaporated, replaced by a grim, hollow-eyed resignation. They had brought their own lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, who looked deeply unhappy to be there. He had clearly reviewed the situation and advised them of their position, which was, to put it mildly, untenable. Miss Albright began, her voice professional and crisp. We are here today to finalize the transfer of the deed for the property known as Stillwater Creek Farm from the management of Carter and Brooke Miller, under power of attorney, back to the sole ownership of Mrs. Victoria Miller. We also have an agreement for the subsequent sale of that property to the Oak County Land Trust. She slid a set of documents across the polished table. Carter stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. Brooke wouldn't even look at them. Her gaze was fixed on a point on the wall just over my head. Their lawyer cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to sign, under the condition that Mrs. Miller agrees to the terms of the water access agreement, as previously discussed, which will allow the sale to the land trust to proceed, thereby satisfying their outstanding financial obligations to the bank. It was a formality. They had no cards left to play. They had spent the last 2 days on the phone with their bank, with Viridian's lawyers, with anyone who would listen, and had found every door closed to them. The developer had officially pulled out, threatening a lawsuit for fraudulent inducement, a threat they only dropped when Carter and Brooke agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement and return their initial deposit, which they'd already spent. The bank, seeing the colossal devaluation of their collateral, had called in the loan. My offer wasn't just their best option, it was their only one. My mother is being incredibly generous, I said, speaking for the first time. The sound of my voice made both of them flinch. She could have let the farm go to auction and left you to face bankruptcy. She is giving you a way out, a clean slate. Carter finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a baffled resentment. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. Why are you doing this? I leaned forward slightly. Because unlike you, Carter, I do care about the family name, and I don't want to see it drag through a bankruptcy court. This isn't a gift, it's damage control. Your father built a legacy of integrity over 60 years. You two managed to destroy it in 6 months. This is me, cleaning up your mess. Brooke finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. So you get the farm back. You win. Is that what you wanted? To see us humiliated? What I wanted, Brooke, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, was to live out my years in the home my husband and I built together. What I wanted was to be treated with love and respect, not as an inconvenience to be managed. What I wanted was for my children to see the farm as a gift, not a cash machine. I didn't get what I wanted, so I settled for what was right. I picked up a pen from the table, signed the papers. Carter picked up his own pen, his hand shaking. He signed his name with a quick, angry slash. Brooke followed, her signature a tight, cramped, little knot of resignation. They pushed the documents back across the table. It was done. Just like that, my home was mine again. Miss Albright reviewed the signatures and nodded. Everything appears to be in order. The transfer will be filed with the county clerk this afternoon. We all stood. There were no handshakes. Carter and Brooke gathered their things and turned to leave, their lawyer trailing behind them like a somber undertaker. At the door, Brooke paused and looked back at me. There were no tears in her eyes, just a vast, empty bitterness. I hope you're happy, Mom, she said. I am, Brooke, I replied honestly. I truly am. I'm at peace. It wasn't the kind of triumphant, fist-pumping happiness you see in movies. It was a quieter, more profound feeling. It was the solid, grounding feeling of things being put right. The universe had been out of balance, and I had simply given it a firm, steadying nudge back into place. The new reality set in quickly for them. With the sale to the land trust, their debt was cleared, but they were left with virtually nothing. Carter's strategic brilliance had resulted in a net loss. Brooke's dreams of a city life funded by a rural windfall were gone. They had to sell their expensive cars and downsize their lifestyles. The public humiliation in our hometown made it impossible for them to return for anything more than fleeting, uncomfortable visits to see me, which they have yet to attempt. As for me, I didn't move back to the farm. Not right away. The sale to the land trust went through, and Stillwater Creek Farm is now the Stillwater Creek Preserve. The farmhouse is a small museum and visitor center. Arthur is its volunteer curator. The land is protected forever. No luxury homes, no golf courses, just wildflowers, cattle grazing on leased pastures, and the quiet murmur of the creek. It's a different kind of legacy than Robert and I had planned, but I think he would approve. He wanted the land to be safe, and now it is. I used the money from my own savings, the money I had carefully put away over the years, to buy a small cottage on the edge of town. It has a garden, a porch swing, and a clear view of the hills that surround my old home. It's quiet and it's mine. I am beholden to no one. It's been a year now. The silence in my new home is a peaceful one. It's the sound of solitude, not loneliness. I've reconnected with old friends. I have dinner with Arthur twice a week. I've joined a pottery class. I am, for the first time in a very long time, simply Victoria, not a mother, not a widow, not a victim, just me. I sometimes wonder if Carter and Brooke will ever understand the lesson. I doubt it. People like them tend to see themselves as the victims of circumstance, their failures always someone else's fault. They will tell the story of their overbearing mother who sabotaged their brilliant business deal. They will never understand that the deal was rotten from the start, built on a foundation of greed and disrespect. And that's the real moral of this story, isn't it? It's not about a clever legal loophole or a dramatic revenge plot. It's about the foundation of things. Whether it's a house, a business, or a family, if you build it on something rotten, it will eventually collapse. My children forgot that. They saw the farm as a collection of assets to be liquidated. They never saw the love, the sweat, the promises that held it all together. They had the deed to the land, but they never understood the landscape. So here I am. I'm telling you this story, not because I want your pity or even your praise. I'm telling you because I think there are a lot of you out there. People who have been made to feel small, who have been overlooked, who have been told that their feelings and their history don't matter in the face of so-called progress or profit. What I want you to know is that your strength doesn't always lie in shouting or fighting. Sometimes the greatest power comes from a quiet no. It comes from knowing your own worth, from understanding the ground you stand on, and from holding fast to the things that truly matter. They might think they have all the power, all the leverage, but you might just have the water rights. You might just have the one thing they overlooked, the one thing they can't buy, and the one thing they can't live without. Don't ever be afraid to turn off the tap. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel for more stories of justice and new beginnings. Please feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below. It's important for us to know we are not alone. Remember to give this video a like if you believe that true wealth is something that can't be found on a balance sheet.